3, 2, 1.
Well,
Let's go.
Oh, have you not done it?
No, we can go.
All right. To the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and a Bible. If you like the idea of a casual but meaningful chat about the Bible with a couple of goofy British people, stay tuned in. This episode podcast for you.
Yeah, Goofy's right. Day 104 today, covering 1 Kings 6 and 7. If you want a brief overview of these chapters, they are in the description.
What?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, we tried to get the intro less, but then with me mucking around and whatever, it's ended up being probably longer than normal. So
part of it, though, I think if it's too polished, people are like, "Oh, these boys don't want to talk to them." If you're just a couple of idiots, people are like, "Yeah, I'll listen to them. They're a couple of idiots." Like, there's a fine line, isn't there? Really.
With us, there isn't. We're clearly in the idiocy side.
Yeah, some days we're like spot on and bang on. Some days we're just all over the joint. Anyway,
yeah.
So I did a little bit of research for this. I actually threw it up on our social media. I think I was quite happy with that because it was talking in here, 1 Kings 6 verse 2, that the temple Solomon built was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 high, which basically is 27 meters long, 9 meters wide, 13.5 meters high. And I started off by Googling how big is like the biggest building in the world. And I was like, it's like thousands of meters. And I was like, okay, let's tone this down. Eventually, it's about the size of a basketball court. So it wasn't the biggest building by any means, but it was flipping impressive. Everything that they threw in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's really cool, man. I was trying to visualize it as well with the cubits and everything. And I was like, that does seem actually pretty small. But something I really liked about the construction of it is only blocks dressed at the quarry were used. No hammer, chisel, or any other iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. Imagine something of this beauty and intricacy, and you don't hear any construction noise. And then I looked into that, funny enough. So, you know, best mates, both looking into these things. Solomon did not want the sound of man's work to dominate the site of the temple. He wanted to communicate as much as possible that the temple was of God and not of man. So he didn't even want the workers to be attributed to the temple as best as possible. He wanted it to be erected, nothing funny about that, to God without any mention of man in there, which is just, again, like good Solomon, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like a little game we could play, like good Solomon, bad Solomon.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good Solomon at the beginning, and then there's a lot of bad Solomon at the end.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's super cool. I didn't realize that. That's good to know. Because I found that, and it's just, again, these guys are not using any power tools anyway, but the fact they're not doing any of it on site, everything's being carried there, dragged there, held there, whatever, is pretty flipping impressive. And then in 1 Kings 6:11, then the word of the Lord came to Solomon, as for this temple you're building, if, again, bit of a contingency, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws, keep my commands, then I will fulfill the promise I gave to David your father. Oath with a condition. Smart.
Very, very smart. And unfortunately, Solomon isn't smart. I can segue to the tragedy of it, really. So the temple is constructed, this is 1 Kings 7 now, verse 1, in 13 years. In 7 years. But Solomon takes 13 years to build his own palace. And I just think that that's so important to realize, right? So it's great that Solomon spends 7 years erecting this temple, but he spent 13 years erecting a palace for himself.
Yeah.
So, and then I have to say, because you know, anyone who's listened to even a couple of these podcasts knows that I'm really into my numbers. The number 13 I looked up because I've always had a thing about that number, symbolic of rebellion and lawlessness in the Bible. So it forebodes the fact that Solomon is going to fall, he's going to make bad decisions, and he built this for himself.
Yeah.
So There you go.
So I love that, mate, because I spotted the very same thing and I looked that up as well. And I went a step further and deeper into that as well, because not only did it take approximately twice as long to build, it was approximately twice the size of the temple. So like I just said, it was 27 by 9 by 13. The palace was 45 by 22 by 13 and a half. So it's actually like twice the footprint as well. And it doesn't mention the detail in the palace, but I'm sure it's just as on point, just as specific. Like, one of the things that I pulled out from the temple is in 6 verse 25, the second cherubim also mentioned 10 cubits, which I can't remember exactly what, 3.2 meters, and were identical in size and shape. So these ain't using like cutouts, 3D printing. This is people hand carving these wings of the cherubim, 6 meters, that are identical. And I bet that's not like my identical, where it's like close enough. That is going to be bada boom, bada boom, spot on. So there's involved. But yeah, exactly the same thing. Like, he's spent all this time and effort and money and energy building this beautiful temple to the Lord. Then he's gone and built himself one that's twice the size. And he then built one in a similar size for Pharaoh's daughter. So is she becoming an idol as well as himself? So
that's good.
That's good. Thank you, mate.
That's good. That's got to be good. Okay. So with all of this as well, there's the tragedy of the fact that we're building a temple in the first place in an attempt to represent the Garden of Eden, which obviously we ungratefully left. You know, we had that choice. We left the garden that God had already made for us. So there's this irony to that, I think, throughout this whole thing. All this beauty and intricacy that we're trying to replicate never even comes close to what God gave us freely at the beginning in the first place. So
big.
Then I just got one other thing that I'd like to say, and then I'm out for today. Pillars of bronze. I forget which verse, apologies for that, but some scholars have said that the pillars were meant to represent and remind us of Israel's exodus. The 2 pillars being the representatives of the pillar of fire by night, which obviously God showed the Israelites through the exodus, and the pillar of cloud by day, which again were constant reminders to the presence of God while they were in the wilderness.
That's cool. 2 bronze pillars, 7. So 1 Kings 7:15. It mentions each of them bloody tall, 12 cubits, 8 cubits high. Which smeg, that's a lot of notes in there. Bloody big.
Yeah.
I pulled out the bit just before that, because it's saying in literally verse 14, Huram was filled with wisdom and with understanding and with knowledge to do all kinds of bronze work. And I wondered whether he was a descendant of Moses's bronze guy, because Moses had a bunch of guys that were like super skilled. I was wondering if he was a descendant. I tried to look it up, couldn't find it. I typed in like Moses's bronze guy and it didn't come up, funny enough.
Funny enough. Well, I'd like to just add to that quickly then, because I think when we were talking about, we do, for once, the tabernacle, when that was built, do you remember we were talking about this? These are people who were slaves in Egypt. They're now getting to use their skills to glorify God instead of glorify Pharaoh. But at the same time, some of the skills that they're demonstrating when building the tabernacle are clearly gifts from God. They're not skills that they had already. Think about what you were saying about the identical cherubim. There's no way that these people had that level of skill. So again, all of this is gifted from God to glorify him, to build this out. And I love that as well, whether it's a descendant of the old bronze guy or not.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Then the last thing I wanted to just mention briefly, I just checked into it in the Africa Bible. One of the little application footnotes it gave was basically like different kings, different giftings. And it was along the lines of, it referenced like each king did his own thing. So Solomon built the temple where David couldn't. And effectively, each king has a different level of gifting, a different thing that they can bring. And it referenced that to modern day sort of pastors or priests or whatever, where just because a pastor you've had for so many years is so good at pastoral care, so good at outreach, so good at this, that, and the other, and next person isn't as good, everyone has different giftings to bring to a different church at a different time. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just everyone has different giftings for that season. So yeah.
That's awesome.
You, mate. So tomorrow's readings at 1 Kings 8 and 9. So why don't you beautiful people pick up your Bible-y thing, get on reading.
In the meantime, please consider joining us on social media at 2 Brits and a Bible, and consider sharing this with someone to help spread the word of God.